This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity. Like Progressive home and auto policies, they're best when they're bundled too. Having these two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
I read as much as possible about joy. I took notes daily on it, and I just thought, does it get any better than this?
That's Angela Williams Gorrell, professor, pastor, and the author of The Gravity of Joy, in which she recounts her experience teaching a class about joy at Yale.
In 4 weeks, lost 3 people that I loved very suddenly, and I just thought, study joy? Unthinkable.
Today, we'll explore joy, what it is not, potential gateways to joy, and the perhaps surprising ways, according to Miroslav Volf, that joy and sadness may go together.
Joy and sadness, they're not incompatible. They can live together. In one person, they can live together in one moment.
All coming right up. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. Joy, it seems we all want it. Our consumerist economy promises us joy in the next product or experience. Our romance myths promise us joy in a life partner. Some faith traditions similarly promise us joy. But what is it? What does the experience of it entail or look like? How might one cultivate it? What are the right questions to be raised when simply considering the possibility or pursuit of joy? Today, we discuss joy with 2 guests who have thought long and deeply about joy amidst particularly difficult circumstances. Angela Williams Gorrell, author of The Gravity of Joy, and Yale theologian Miroslav Volf, author of Life Worth Living. A line from the poet Khalil Gibran reads, "Your joy is sorrow unmasked." Gibran's line points us toward a commingling, an inseparability, perhaps even, of joy and sorrow. Both Angela and Miroslav exposit this for us, that life can be excruciatingly hard and simultaneously joyful. And in that vein, a warning that this episode contains mention of suicide, addiction, and death. We start with Angela Gorrell. Today we're talking about her new book, The Gravity of Joy, a story of being lost and found. Welcome, Angela.
I'm so honored to be here and to be talking with you today. Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you here in Nashville on your way.
Yes, it's so
talking
great.
to various audiences here in the Southeast, so glad that we could meet here. Your book is seeking, as you say, to consider joy as a counteragent to America's crisis of despair, which is a lovely line, but I'm going to flash forward just a second, not to talk about it yet, but we will later. And yet at the end of the book, or in one of the last chapters, you say, but we can't make joy like spaghetti. There's not a recipe for it, right? And so you're clearly not doing self-help technique in the book. And yet you frame the sort of difficulty of this book's agenda by talking about how you were studying joy, teaching a course at Yale on joy when the so-called crisis of despair crashed into your own life. Tell us a little bit about some of the stories you share in the book about how this crisis begins to crash into your own life.
It was 8 months into working on the theology of joy and the Good Life Project at Yale. And teaching a class called Life Worth Living, or I was about to. I hadn't taught it yet. Of course, in the first few months that I was there, I just was over the moon about what I was doing. I read as much as possible about joy. I took notes daily on it. And I just thought, does it get any better than this?
Yeah.
Like working on this team at Yale University, I don't know that it does. I felt very, very grateful.
But amidst this exciting time researching joy, something unexpected happens.
8 months into working on the project, one of my family members died by suicide. And that day changed my life forever in a moment. And that, people talk about that a lot, how 1 minute of your life can change everything. It changed the way I saw my life, the way I related to other people. It changed my faith in dramatic ways.
The deceased was her cousin's husband, Dustin. Being an ordained Mennonite pastor, Angela was called upon to help officiate the funeral.
I think as a pastor, you're kind of called upon by your family in the midst of crisis in a way that it makes sense to everybody. And so just helping to do the funeral, present for a lot of very, very painful moments that I don't even write about in the book. And got back to Connecticut a week and a half later and just thought, I don't know how we're going to recover from this as a family. This is going to be a very difficult road to healing for us. And then a week and a half later-ish, get a text from my sister, you need to call me. I call her and find out that my nephew, Mason, had died at 22 very suddenly of a previously unknown health condition, a heart condition that he had. Called my oldest sister, who is his mother, and I'm like, Steph, do you want me to come? Yes, will you come? And so I find myself just a couple weeks after Dustin's funeral headed to Albuquerque, New Mexico for another funeral. And got back to Connecticut on a Sunday night, the day after Mason's funeral. And I read his obituary at his funeral, spoke at Dustin's funeral, just my heart. I did not think I could be any sadder. It was just like, I don't know, again, how am I going to recover from this? Oh my goodness. This has been the worst 3 weeks of my life, 2 days later, after I get back, get a message that my dad is in the ER fighting for his life. I can't even comprehend it at that time. And I just think there is no way that my dad is dying this week. This cannot happen to me. This cannot happen to all of us. Steph just lost her son. We cannot lose our dad right now. So it was my first day teaching at Yale University. I just got my PhD 6 months before. I'm trying to hold myself to, I'm teaching a brand new class that I've never taught before too. And then it's called Life Worth Living. And so, I just do whatever people do, I think, when they are in the mode of survival. I was just in survival mode. And I went to some other namaste place in my head. I don't know what I did. And I went into there and I just did my thing. I just kept my heart almost closed to what was happening. And then I just casually mentioned to my students, if I can't be in the next class, it's because my dad's not doing very well. He's in the ER and, he's really sick. He's dying. But I didn't say that. And then the next morning, I just realized my sister and I were going back and forth. And she called the nurse, and she has a degree. She's an occupational therapist, but she's done nursing school too. So she called the nurse and was just shoot us straight. And the nurse was like, if you want to see your dad alive, you have to come today. So then I found myself on 3 planes in a rental car, getting there as fast as possible, begging God to allow me to see my dad. And my dad died that night. I did spend 5 hours with them, which was so beautiful. It was sacred, holy ground, So 8 months into the Joy Project, in 4 weeks, lost 3 people that I loved very suddenly, and got back to Connecticut. And I just thought, study joy, unthinkable.
When you think back to your family member who died by suicide and the days following, and you're being present to your family and you're being present to your own grief, what are kind of some key moments that you look back on of what you experienced in the wake of such a devastating death? Or what are details of your experience that stand out to you?
I mean, honestly, I've never cried that much in my life for 6 days straight. Today, I can cry thinking about it. Even into Christmas, it was 7, 8 days straight. Every moment was trying not to cry. All of us, we just cried so much. So it was a lot of weeping, but then this real desire to celebrate who he was, to honor him in death. We wanted on that Friday night in that funeral service, that memorial service, we wanted his life to be more than about his death. So we worked very, very hard to honor his life.
I mentioned Lebanese-American poet Khalil Gibran a moment ago. In his famed book, The Prophet, in the section called On Joy and Sorrow, he says, "The self-same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven, and is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives?" But how, though? How does all the sort of suffering Angela suffered relate to joy?
I certainly have had experience of a funeral.
This is Angela's former boss at Yale, Miroslav Volf.
I am sad that this person has departed, that somebody who was such a live presence in my life is no longer there, sometimes deep also grief. While at the same time, I've had experience of just that which makes me miss them, I'm rejoicing over.
Miroslav Volf is one of the world's leading Christian theologians and the director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. In recent years, much of his work has focused on the study of joy. Similar to Khalil Gibran, he notes the potential co-location, we might say, of joy and deep sorrow.
I celebrate something while I'm grieving, and in grieving, I'm also celebrating something and rejoicing. And so you can see how, because joy and sorrow are tied to particular states of affairs, they have what philosophers call intentional objects. Certain things have happened and I rejoice over them. Certain things have happened and I am sad over them. And so I can, at one and the same time, having different objects in view, I can both rejoice and I can also be sad. And in fact, there are traditions, especially in Jewish tradition, of nurturing sadness as accompanying every joy.
Every joy.
Every joy. And the reason for that is very, very simple. There's something untrue about giving oneself completely to joy while one realizes that there's so many things in the world for which I should be grieving. How can you rejoice? That has been often questioned, being engaged in this 3-year-long process, studying joy. How can you concentrate so much on joy when there's so much
The world is so broken.
suffering, so broken world? But it's possible that even in every joy, that you pay homage to the brokenness so that you don't proudly and obliviously, with regard to others, forget about the sorrows.
I suppose by this point in our episode, Khalil Gibran has become our sort of episode poet guide. But in the aforementioned passage, he continues, "When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Some of you say joy is greater than sorrow, and others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable." For Miroslav Volf, these are not merely ivory-towered theoretical observations on joy and sorrow. Miroslav is Croatian, born in the former Yugoslavia, and was raised during a time of acute ethnic and religious conflict. His best-known book is entitled Exclusion and Embrace. in which he explores theological notions of forgiveness, especially in the face of the brutal violence observed in the Yugoslav War and its horrific ethnic cleansing.
My father was inmate in the labor camp. My mother gave birth to 6 children, 2 of whom are alive today, 4 of whom died. We were a persecuted church. I grew up in a communist environment where it was not particularly a good thing to be a Christian. So the pressure, the suffering, the loss.
During his childhood, a nanny came to live with Miroslav's family. She was in her late 50s and had lost her husband in the war, and she suffered from diabetes and had nowhere to live.
She had all sorts of troubles in her life, and yet she was the most joyful person that I have ever met in my life. She was always singing. There was a kind of peace that pervaded her life. It was kind of notwithstanding peace. I have a joy which the world did not give and the world cannot take away. It was a kind of joy which African American communities know that quite well in this country. Other people who endure great suffering have that. That was my experience. It was my experience of the possibility of joy in the midst of actually great pain and great suffering. There's a phrase that Alexander Schmemann, the great Russian Orthodox theologian, mentions in his diaries, where he describes joy as a bright sorrow. So that even in the overwhelmingly sorrowful environment, you can have the brightness of joy. You can flip that, right? Sorrowful brightness. Right? So that in the overwhelming joy, there's a place that registers brokenness that might come afterwards, brokenness that was, brokenness that is elsewhere. We're not oblivious. We live in the world.
So do they suggest particular practices that help facilitate holding both of these together, or is it mainly a matter of intentionality about them? Or
if I recall correctly, there is in Jewish practices, you finish a house, but you leave unfinished part of it. Just like there's a chair open for Elijah
to come, yes.
Come, right? So there's something unfinished, undone, to remind you that the world isn't yet as it ought to be. And you can then imagine how a variety of families can institute something that is a reminder. Just like when we pray and are grateful for the food that we have, we regularly remind ourselves in that prayer of those whose needs have not been met, so that our rejoicing does not end up being this presumptuous, oblivious enjoyment, this living in the complexity of the good and the shot through by evil kind of world.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our episode on joy with Angela Williams Gorrell and Miroslav Volf. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in the episode, as well as the PDF of my complete interview notes and a full transcript. We would be delighted if you'd tell your friends about No Small Endeavor and invite them to join us on the podcast, because that helps extend the reach of the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world. Coming up, we return to Angela's story and discuss America's crisis of despair and the ways in which joy may be a counter-agent in the midst of that crisis, and we will hear more from Miroslav Volf. Hello, my friends. Are you looking to find those true stories no one has ever told you about? Then you should check out the chart-topping podcast, Here's Where It Gets Interesting, hosted by longtime teacher Sharon McMahon, who you may know from her viral Instagram account, Sharon Says So. Here's Where It Gets Interesting will ignite your curiosity about the fascinating stuff that was not in history textbooks, like the sweeping history of Native Americans in the U.S., or the unknown stories that led to former Vice President Hubert Humphrey's pivotal impact in the civil rights movement. Not to mention, Sharon's joined by notable thought leaders, including former U.S. Representative Adam Kinzinger and no small endeavor friend and pastor Esau McCauley, who share insights about history, culture, and politics. So get the facts and listen to Here's Where It Gets Interesting with Sharon McMahon, wherever you get your podcasts. Khalil Gibran, the one who's been our sort of poet guide for this episode, says the following about joy and sorrow. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. An article by Ann Case and Angus Deaton in the journal Foreign Affairs notes that the United States has been undergoing, even prior to the pandemic, an epidemic of deaths of despair. These are fatalities they attribute to drug overdose, alcoholism, or suicide. In fact, these sorts of deaths had grown in such extent that the life expectancy at birth for Americans actually declined for 3 years straight, 2015 to 2017, the first such decline in America since the influenza epidemic following World War I.
We have malformed visions of the good life in American culture.
Again, that's Professor Angela Gorrell, who taught a course at Yale called Life Worth Living.
I think there are many cultural things right now that are contributing to identity crises, which are really very intricately tied to both addiction and suicide.
Again, as we already saw, this is not mere abstract commentary by Angela on deaths of despair, with her own family experiencing death by suicide. But the trauma of deaths of despair goes even deeper in her family, that her father's death was a consequence of opioid addiction.
I denied it for a really long time, not intentionally. And it was just like he lived big for so long. My dad was just not only like a big dude, you know, he just had a big stature, but he was like a big presence in a room. Like he walked into a room, it was just like, here I am, you know, which probably get a little bit of that from, you know. Yeah. And I remember even watching him as a kid, he was an attorney, like watching him do the closing arguments in a courtroom. And it was like magic. The guy could captivate an audience. And that's why he won so much. Because his closing arguments were on point. It was beautiful. You could hear a pin drop in the courtroom because he was articulate and he would walk and like pause in all the right places. And you're just, you know. And then I remember post-college just starting to see in him that, like he stopped going to work. He's not working as much. And then realizing in phone calls, he sounds so sleepy. He sounds like he's not able to engage in this conversation. You know, and I knew he was taking a lot of pain medication for pain that he had. Like he had had 2 hip surgeries. But then the thing was, he didn't want to go to rehab. He didn't want to really learn to walk again. Well, then every time I went to visit him, it got worse and worse. And over the years, the phone calls got worse and worse. And I remember when he could not remember where I went to school or where I lived. He's like, wait, where do you live again? I'm like, I'd lived in Los Angeles for years. I was like, what? Like, why don't you know where I live? And I became angry. And I just thought, why don't you care enough about me to remember these things? And I didn't know what opioids did. I didn't know also how much he was doing it until a particular time that I described that I went there. And it was like, wow. His house was in disarray. It was disgusting. And I was like, this is his life. His whole life is doing pills all day long. That's what he does. He sits in a bedroom by himself. But anybody you talk to who has become addicted to opioids say it's almost like being in a womb. Like it just creates this like very safe, warm, cozy feeling. Other drugs you want to do with other people, from what I understand. Andrew Sullivan talks about this in a really important article that he wrote, I think, for The New Yorker. But he says, like, the drugs of your time say a lot about kind of the moment of the culture, which I thought was so fascinating in this piece. There are other drugs like cocaine, like that people want to do with other people. And it makes you want to be around other people. You want to like go party with other people. You want to work really hard. You want to do this or that. No. Opioids make you want to retreat and to be alone, but they make you happy. But that's the thing. They make you happy with no one else. They make you feel safe with no one else. And so, yeah, I watched him go from being the guy who lived really big to the guy who lived so small. And he forgot my birthday, didn't come to my wedding reception. Then that's when I really realized, like, this thing has overtaken his life. And especially that the very last time that I saw him, he had lost so much weight. And it was awful, awful.
Didn't come to your wedding reception?
Mm-mm. I got married in San Diego, and he couldn't come. And I knew he wouldn't be able to come because he was in a wheelchair, but it wasn't just that. I knew, like, he barely leaves his house ever. So, like, he's not going to be able to get on a plane. He's just not in the shape. He had to have a lot of help to even get to a car. But it was important to me that I get to experience this with him, you know? So I created a wedding reception. I had my aunt have it at her house in Kentucky just for him to be able to be there. Nobody else. It was literally just for him. And that morning I called him and he said he couldn't come.
So then came that day in the midst of the start of teaching her first class at Yale when she got the call about her father's impending death.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that my dear friend, Phil Love, former manager of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture, I called him that morning and I asked him, should I go? I don't know. He was my boss other than Miroslav, you know, but like he ran the center. So I'm just like, well, I've been gone a lot the last couple weeks. And I said, should I go? And he was like, yes, get on a plane right now. Like right now, go. Just get off the phone with me and go. And I'm so eternally grateful to him for that. And when I walked into that hospital room, the Angela, who has always loved David Williams, just was very there. Everything that had been happening, everything that he had forgotten, every moment that he'd really hurt me in those hours, it was just like all put aside. And I was just able to tell him, you know, I love you and I'm going to miss you terribly and I'm so grateful for you.
So you say our culture is obsessed with synthetic happiness and yet riddled with pain, which I take that as kind of a double entendre there of synthetic in the sense that we're metaphorically seeking a synthetic happiness and yet sometimes literally seeking synthetic happiness in the synthetic pill, right? In the synthetic drug.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Because we think that happiness is the good life.
And talking about the health crisis, you cite some statistics at one point. The rates of opioid prescriptions since the 1990s are mind-boggling. In 2017, for example, doctors in Kentucky, where your father lived, prescribed at a rate of 86.8 prescriptions for every 100 people, which is mind-boggling. One of the highest prescription rates in the country. In Alabama, my home state, which had the highest rate, doctors wrote 107.2 prescriptions per 100 people. And the sort of sense of brokenness in that, in the wake of destruction, is mind-boggling.
Yeah. You read that statistic and you feel it in your bones. I did. I read that statistic, and there was moments while I was writing this book, while I was doing research, you know, looking for stories or this or that, where I actually had to leave my office at Yale and go take a walk, because you can't read that and then just go on with your day. You can't read this story or that, right?
Right.
You have to, you feel it. Otherwise, we're the people who walk by the Good Samaritan. We don't want to be those people.
We're going to take a short break, but coming right up, we will hear more from Professor Volf and explore some potential gateways to joy, as well as the ways in which joy may not only be possible in times of great sorrow, but the surprising potential sorrow may have as a source of joy. Hey there! Did you know that we have a newsletter? Just imagine if you could have one of your favorite ethics professors send you a list of things to reflect on, think about, practical actions with which to experiment, all on your way to sorting through what it might mean to live a good life. Well, that is the NSE Notebook. I riff on themes and topics related to the show and our guests. Sign up for my NSE Notebook today at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. Back now to Professor Volf discussing the nature of a flourishing human life.
The key question is, how does one find contentment? What does it mean for us to be content? And I think for that, we need not to derive our identity, not to derive the meaning of our lives, not to derive fundamental worth from the things that we acquire in the competitive environment. We need to find joy in something else and in the kinds of relationship. Then let us see everything that we have as a gift and appreciate it in a new way. It's not my acquisition in which I compete with others. It is something that is given to me as a gift. I think the story of the fall can be read from this perspective. Imagine that Adam and Eve were dissatisfied in paradise. That's the story of the fall. They've got everything, but there's dissatisfaction. And the reason why there is dissatisfaction is because they want more. They feel that they're cheated by not having more, rather than concentrating on what is it that it has been given to them. And so that tree that they shouldn't eat was actually, I believe, almost like a sacrament of a given world. Forbidding you to take that reminds you that everything else was given to you, right? And so
the point is not being forbidden. The point is as a reminder that all is gift.
All is gift. Yeah. And therefore you can rejoice that in the gift and find a new, deeper meaning in things that isn't always kind of satisfying the longing that one has, but is not getting satisfied.
So I guess you're not pointing then to a sort of asceticism about things, but a renewed capability to truly and rightfully enjoy things.
Yeah. So the big question is, how come we can be showered with goods and still be dissatisfied? What does it need to take in my relationship to things so that I actually enjoy them, can stay with them and be content and fully enjoy them? I think one of the keys is to see them as a gift, not to seek to try to gain yourself and your competitive advantage out of things, but rather to be able to attend to things themselves, because something and somebody has been communicated to you in those things, and you enjoy God in ordinary things of life by enjoying ordinary things of life.
Yeah, so a sort of rightful materialism, a rightfully ordered materialism.
Absolutely, because we're creatures of matter. We're bodily beings living in a bodily material environment. There's a long history of reflection on our inability to satisfy our desires, all the way from this kind of your human beings can be seen as this sieve through which no matter how much you pour into them, everything that you pour in is pouring out, and the situation does not change. So how does one create human beings as containers in which that which is theirs can be savored? And then time will pass and something else can be taken and savored. And I think one of the keys to me is what's found in the command to keep the Sabbath. You sometimes think of Sabbath also as a kind of prohibition from not working, but rather it is a gift. It's a prohibition from desiring, from striving. 6 days you strive to achieve whatever you need to achieve. But on this one day, striving stops. And what gives way to striving? Not boredom, but rejoicing over that which is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened in the story of God creating the world. Things that God created were good, and God rested on the seventh day in the goodness of the things that have been created. So in a sense, it becomes a celebration of the world and the day of contentment, if you want.
If someone's listening to you and they think, okay, well, give me some concrete, practical, what would be some first steps if they think, I want to take more seriously living an examined life and pursuing a sort of life along the lines you're describing? What might be some practical first steps that people might pursue in this?
Well, so if, for instance, if it's true that discovering the world as a gift is important in living the true life of flourishing, simply paying attention to a bird, paying attention to an animal. I mean, my daughter, who's 14 months, she was observing in our yard. The 4 deer passed by, and I took her, and so she saw the deer moving away. And then, even still now, it's been 2 weeks ago, she's asked, where'd the deer go? A kind of fascination with this one feature of the world that to her, she wouldn't have put it that way, was a gift, right? So attentiveness.
I think practices like these, like attentiveness, as potential gateways to joy, or as practices which cultivate the potential springing up of joy. Rather than focusing upon some pleasurable feeling as the immediate or primary object of my desire, I seek to place my attention on attentiveness itself. There's no guarantee of some affective state on the other side of my being attentive, but that stops being the primary point. The point instead becomes another concern, another question, namely, what does it look like to live a life worth living in the midst of the circumstances in which I find myself?
This would be the question of the relationship between our affective, emotional states and the kind of life that we pursue. Especially in contemporary Western settings, understanding of happiness which foregrounds our emotions and positive feelings has become dominant. This was not always so in the tradition, but traditionally, positive feelings were always desirable, important aspect, but they were never as heavily foregrounded as they are today.
And so how do you differentiate joy from happiness, say?
Well, if you understand happiness as a positive feeling, then depending how you understand it, you can see happiness and joy as being almost synonymous, but joy gives you advantage of foregrounding some things that are really important. So, for instance, people today can understand happiness very much as a simply positive feeling. You can then say that there are such things as positive feeling pills, happiness pills, right? Or people smoke weed and feel happy, or whatever it is. They have positive feeling. And that satisfies this requirement of happiness.
It's getting a dopamine release in the brain.
Exactly. Basically, exactly what it is. But the point is that joy is different than that. Joy entails release of dopamine. But it's always rejoicing or having positive feeling over something good. Thomas Aquinas talks about joy which arises when a person is united with the object of his or her love, right? With something that is deemed to be good, and I'm united with it. I rejoice, I just sit and rejoice. I rejoice always over something. Now that then is tied to the vision of the good life that has different other aspects, namely
communal, social, friendship,
to living rightly, obeying the command, having a sense of dignity of having done what is right as a human being, or of having a community of friends, or living in an environment that is healthy.
Miroslav's subtle distinction between joy and happiness then makes space to raise the following sorts of questions.
What might be the goods of suffering? What might be the goods of poverty? What might be goods that provide richer, deeper enjoyment than the flashy stuff that often passes as being successful and achieving. And I think I would pay attention to the relationship between joy and sadness, joy and empathy. They're not incompatible.
And this brings us back to the experience of Angela Gorrell, that while researching and writing on joy, while teaching a class at Yale on a life worth living, her family experienced first a suicide, a second death then of her young nephew by a previously undiagnosed health condition, and a third death of her father due to opioid addiction. In the midst of that sort of grief, what did her daily pursuit of a life worth living entail?
I woke up every day for a year and a half just in the fog of grief. And I did wonder, how will I ever recover from this? I was incredibly sad all the time. And so I sought help in all kinds of ways. And I did do some EMDR therapy, which was helpful for me. I think that's important for people to know. I tried journaling. I tried walks around the city and blah, 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 yoga and stuff. But then I signed up randomly to be a co-leader of a Bible study at a prison, a maximum security prison with women. And I had been thinking for a few years about mass incarceration. I'd read some books on it, and I was really feeling that sort of tug in my own spirit to respond to mass incarceration in some sort of very concrete way, do something about this. And so I'd just been feeling like maybe I would end up doing some ministry related to prison. I didn't know how it was all going to happen. So I decided during the saddest time of my life to become a co-leader of a Bible study. And of course, the quintessential beautiful things that God does all the time, I think I'm going to go and minister to these women, and I'm the one that's ministered to. And that's why I dedicate the book, I dedicate the book to Dustin and Mason and my dad, but I also dedicate the book to the women in prison, because it's such a beautiful, it's basically the yin and the yang almost, these women who helped me to get on the road to healing. But I say in the dedication, may the joy that you brought me be yours too. When I talk about this, I talk about them as gateways to joy. We can't manufacture joy. We can't make it like we make spaghetti, but we can be ready for it and we can look for it.
Yeah.
Joy is, from my perspective, the feeling of the recognition and connection we feel to what is meaningful, truthful, beautiful, good. Oftentimes our connection with other people. So a gateway to joy is gratitude. And I think Bob Emmons has done a really good job as a scholar trying to help people to understand the power of gratitude in our lives. His books are really wonderful on this topic. It was being in that Bible study with women that I really saw this enacted, where the more that we would give them space to actually talk about, is there something to be thankful for? What can we be grateful for, even in this room? And they always could find things to be grateful for. And as they shared, you could see it became an infectious thing that happened where it was a contagion, where people are sharing with each other. Oh, yeah, that reminds me, this person did this for me, and this happened. And when we meditate on things that are good in our lives, when we meditate on the truth, when we focus on that, it opens ourselves up to that warm, beautiful feeling that joy is. Another, I think, gateway to joy is faithful presence with other people. When we are faithfully present to each other, and I am not someone who's get rid of all technology or anything like that. Obviously, I wrote a book about the new media landscape and ways to navigate it that are constructive. But part of it is, there is something about when I was in that room with people and there's no cell phones, we can't bring them into the prison. There was something about sitting in a circle. There's something about sitting with people, faithfully present, listening to one another from the heart, sharing stories, sharing gratitude, sharing lament, that there is a power in that the effect of which is joy. Sometimes it's a sobering joy. And then I think that creating spaces of joy with expectation, hope is a gateway to joy. Jürgen Moltmann, the great theologian, says that hope is the anticipation of joy. So actually being able to write out our hopes, name our hopes, declare our hopes, I think is a way of posturing ourselves for joy.
Related to that, you have this beautiful picture when you first start going to the prison about singing and being together, and a story about singing This Little Light of Mine. and gathering as a sort of seed, perhaps, of joy.
Yeah. Gathering is a gateway to joy. I think music is a gateway to joy. I think we see that a lot, sort of similar to sports, it's like that collective joy that can happen in a space.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine.
When I was a boy in church in Alabama, in a predominantly white church, This Little Light of Mine was a vacation Bible school song that was a little kid's song, complete with some finger choreography, which simply meant something like, I'm going to be a good example. Then years later, when I would learn of the key role music played in the American Civil Rights Movement, I discovered that This Little Light of Mine was actually a song of resistance. So combine that fact, along with this picture of these women singing This Little Light of Mine in prison, along with Professor Gorrell's assertion that
joy becomes an act of resistance against despair.
Well, then, you've just got something worth paying some attention to.
Let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, Lord.
That's our friends, the Settles Connection, singing This Little Light of Mine at one of our live shows from years ago. Back to Angela Gorrell.
That's what music, I think, really allows us to do, that probably creates this room for joy in our lives, is because in that room...
That is, in the prison where Angela was gathered with fellow prisoners singing and sharing.
There was no shame. Shame will keep a lot of us from joy. Like, I talk about obstacles to joy, too. Shame is one of them.
Yeah.
And in that room, though, and it wasn't me that, produced it. It was these women, where this was a place where you could be fully yourself. You could tell the truth in that room. And not just the bad truth, but you told the truth, like, I see you. Like, this is who you are. This is who you can become. This is how you're seen. We told the truth to each other. And when you tell the truth to one another, and not in that sort of really messed up way we often talk about truth telling, which is like, you tell hard things in love with people. Like, no. In that room, we celebrated, we affirmed what was good about one another. And that creates room for joy. And that takes away shame. And the more we told the truth to one another, the more we were faithfully present, the more we came to that space and gave each other permission to feel whatever we were feeling. And then we entered into music, the more room for joy we had.
You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our episode on joy with Angela Williams Gorrell and Miroslav Volf. And special thanks to the Settles Connection for their live performance of This Little Light of Mine with Calvin Settles on that grand piano. Oh my, it's just stellar. Love it. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. And the support of the John Templeton Foundation, whose vision is to become a global catalyst for discoveries that contribute to human flourishing. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carrie Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Ellis Osborne, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.